On February 20th, 1967, a boy was born in Aberdeen, Washington. His parents' split would haunt him, but music became his only anchor. This is the story of Nirvana, how Kurt Cobain's pain and genius sparked an underground revolution, leading three outsiders to craft Nevermind and turn the whole music world upside down. But what drove Nirvana from small-town misfits to legends? And why did everything unravel at the height of their power? Kurt Cobain grew up in Aberdeen, Washington, surrounded by the gray drizzle of the Pacific Northwest and a family that seemed both close and distant. His parents, Donald and Wendy, welcomed him into a world already threaded with music. Relatives played in local bands, and his Aunt Mari kept guitars around the house. Even as a toddler, Kurt gravitated to melody. By age 2, he was singing along to Beatles records, his voice echoing through the living room, while relatives looked on, amused at his natural sense of rhythm. Aunt Mari would later remember, he was singing from the time he was 2. He had a lot of charisma from a very young age. But the warmth of early childhood faded quickly. In 1975, when Kurt was 7, his parents divorced. The split tore through the family, leaving Kurt with a sense of shame and uncertainty that never really healed. Years later, he would say, "I remember feeling ashamed for some reason. I was ashamed of my parents. I wanted that security, so I resented my parents for quite a few years because of that." The divorce sent him bouncing between relatives and friends, sometimes staying with his father in Montesano, sometimes with his mother in Aberdeen. The constant shuffling made it hard for him to settle, and he grew more withdrawn as the years passed. School offered little relief. Kurt was a talented artist, sketching cartoon characters and band logos in the margins of his notebooks. But he struggled to find a place among his peers. Rumors and bullying followed him through the halls. He played up his outsider status, sometimes telling classmates he was gay to keep them at arm's length. Teachers noticed his talent, but also his growing isolation. By high school, Kurt was drifting further away, skipping classes and eventually dropping out just weeks before graduation. Music became his refuge. At home, he'd sit for hours with a guitar or at the piano, writing songs and experimenting with sounds. Even before adolescence, he was composing his own tunes, channeling the turbulence around him into something melodic and raw. Family members recall him singing and playing for anyone who would listen, but most of the time, he played for himself. The themes that would later define his lyrics, abandonment, pain, alienation, were already taking shape. For Kurt, music wasn't just a hobby. It was a lifeline, a way to make sense of a world that so often felt out of reach. By the mid-1980s, the seeds of rebellion and creativity had taken root. Though the road ahead would be rocky, the emotional scars of Kurt's childhood would become the fuel for his art, setting the stage for the music that would soon change everything. In the mid-1980s, Kurt Cobain's restless creativity pushed him beyond solitary songwriting. He started recording rough tracks on a borrowed 4-track, capturing raw, abrasive songs under the name Fecal Matter. The tape, called Illiteracy Will Prevail, circulated among a tight circle of friends. But it was Chris Novoselic who heard something different in those jagged riffs and confessional lyrics. Novoselic later recalled, "The songs had this raw authenticity. I knew there was something special in what Kurt was doing. It took persistence." After months of nudging, Chris finally agreed to form a band with Kurt. In 1987, in Aberdeen, they began rehearsing in basements, cycling through drummers and names. Skid Row, Pencap Chew, Ted Ed Fred, before settling on Nirvana. Their early sound was a collision of punk speed and volume, filtered through Cobain's knack for melody. The band's first shows were small, sweaty affairs in VFW halls and college bars scattered across Washington state, with set lists blending originals and covers from the Melvins and Shocking Blue. The Seattle music scene at the time thrived on do-it-yourself ethics. Small independent labels like Sub Pop, run by Bruce Pavitt and Jonathan Poneman, were scouting for bands that could capture the region's gritty energy. Nirvana's first studio session, recorded by Jack Endino at Reciprocal Recording in Seattle, produced a handful of tracks that caught Sub Pop's attention. The band's debut single, a cover of Love Buzz, arrived in November 1988 as part of Sub Pop's Singles Club. With only 1,000 copies pressed, it quickly sold out among local collectors and fanzines, hinting at the underground buzz building around the band. Recording their first full-length album, Bleach, in December 1988, Nirvana worked with Endino again, laying down most tracks in just 30 hours for a total cost of $606.17, money borrowed from Jason Everman, who briefly joined as a second guitarist. Released on June 15, 1989, Bleach offered a snapshot of the band's early power: heavy, sludgy riffs, pounding drums, and Cobain's voice shifting from a whisper to a scream. Songs like Negative Creep and About a Girl revealed both the band's punk roots and Cobain's gift for writing sharp, memorable hooks. While Bleach sold only a few thousand copies at first, it established Nirvana as a force in the Pacific Northwest's underground. The partnership between Cobain and Novoselic anchored the band, but the search for a drummer who could match their intensity remained unresolved. The next chapter would demand a new level of energy, setting Nirvana on the edge of a transformation that would soon push them far beyond the Seattle scene. Dave Grohl stepped into the rehearsal space in Seattle in September 1990, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a reputation. Word had traveled fast. He was the powerhouse drummer from Washington, D.C.'s Scream, and Buzz Osborne of the Melvins had tipped him off to Nirvana's search for a new member. Chris Novoselic and Kurt Cobain watched as Grohl settled behind the drum kit. The first downbeat landed with a force neither had expected. Chris later said, "When Dave started playing, he blew our minds. Instantly, it just clicked." Grohl's style was relentless but precise, driving each song forward with thunderous fills and a natural groove. Jack Endino, who had recorded the band since their earliest sessions, described Grohl's playing as machine-like precision and natural groove. For a group that had cycled through drummers, each with their own quirks and limitations, this was something else entirely. The chemistry was immediate. Songs that once felt raw and unstable now locked into place, every part sharper and more explosive. Within days, Nirvana sounded transformed. Grohl's drumming didn't just keep time, it gave the music new muscle. Tracks like Breed and In Bloom took on a different life, pulsing with energy and confidence. The trio started rehearsing relentlessly, taping boombox demos in cramped rooms and refining arrangements late into the night. Even in these rough recordings, the difference was clear. Grohl's snare cracked through the fuzz, his kick drum anchoring every riff. The band's sound, once defined by its unpredictability, was now unmistakably tight. For Cobain and Novoselic, the search was over. With Grohl in place, Nirvana finally had the lineup that could match the intensity of Kurt's songwriting in the studio. The band's next move would take them far from Seattle to a studio in California, where they would begin work on an album that would change everything. Inside Sound City Studios in Van Nuys, California, the air was thick with anticipation and tape hiss. It was May 1991, and Nirvana had just arrived to record what would become their breakthrough album. Producer Butch Vig, known for his meticulous ear, set up the band in the main tracking room, taking full advantage of the studio's legendary Neve 8028 console and analog tape machines. Dave Grohl's drums were placed dead center to capture the natural reverb of the space, while Chris Novoselic's bass amp was tucked into a closet for isolation. Kurt Cobain brought a battered Fender Mustang and a handful of pedals, searching for a sound that was both jagged and melodic. Vig pushed the band beyond the rawness of their earlier work. He insisted on multiple takes, often coaxing Cobain into double-tracking his vocals, a technique Cobain resisted, worried it would make the song sound too polished. Vig remembered telling him, "John Lennon did it." That was usually enough to get Kurt to try another pass, sometimes grumbling, but always delivering the intensity that defined his voice. The tension in these sessions wasn't just artistic, it was technical. Vig wanted clarity and power, but Cobain fought to keep the edges rough. The result was a set of tracks that balanced aggression with hooks, grit with melody. Each song was refined through repetition, Smells Like Teen Spirit started as a loose jam and was hammered into shape over countless takes. Grohl's drumming, captured with a mix of AKG and Shure microphones, gave the songs their punch. Cobain layered clean and distorted guitar parts, sometimes doubling choruses for extra weight. Novoselic re-recorded bass lines when Vig called for tighter takes, adding to the album's cohesion. When the tracking finished, the raw mixes still felt too unvarnished for the label's ambitions. Geffen brought in Andy Wallace to mix the album. Wallace's approach added separation and sheen, dialing up the drums and vocals for maximum impact. The difference was immediate. Songs that once sounded like basement anthems now roared with radio clarity. The band had spent weeks fighting for a sound that was honest, but accessible. By June, the album was finished, its edges sharpened and its hooks unmistakable. What started as another session in a rundown studio had become something with the potential to reach far beyond the underground. On August 17th of '91, a crowd of teenagers poured into a makeshift high school gym at GMT Studios in Culver City. Flyers had gone up around Los Angeles, promising cash and a chance to be in a music video. Most of the kids didn't know much about Nirvana, but by the end of the day, they were part of rock history. Director Samuel Bayer, in his first music video job, pushed for chaos. The band played Smells Like Teen Spirit over and over while the crowd grew restless, sweat-soaked, and wild. By late afternoon, Kurt Cobain urged them to tear the set apart, unleashing a frenzy that made the final cut unforgettable, a swirl of mosh pits, cheerleaders, and rebellion. The single dropped on September 10th, '91. 2 weeks later, Nevermind hit shelves. MTV picked up the video almost immediately, putting it on heavy rotation in the buzz bin. The effect was instant. Teenagers across the country, used to glossy pop and hair metal, suddenly saw something raw and electric. Within weeks, the song was everywhere, on the radio, on television, echoing through high school hallways. Nevermind's sales exploded. The album debuted at number 144 on the Billboard 200, but word of mouth and relentless MTV play sent it rocketing up the charts. By January '92, it had knocked Michael Jackson's Dangerous from the top spot. The record went platinum in less than 4 months and kept climbing. Multi-platinum in the US, over 30 million copies worldwide. Nirvana had become the face of a new era. Their sound and image beamed into millions of living rooms almost overnight. Reading Festival, August 1992. Tens of thousands pressed against the barriers as Nirvana took the stage, rain-soaked and restless. Kurt Cobain appeared in a hospital gown, pushed onto the stage in a wheelchair, mocking rumors about his health and the band's future. Then the band launched into Breed, and the crowd erupted. For over 90 minutes, Nirvana delivered a set that veered from chaos to control. Cobain's voice raw, Grohl's drumming relentless, Novoselic's bass anchoring the storm. Critics and fans later called it one of the greatest festival performances in rock history. Moments like Reading captured Nirvana's power at their peak, but also the pressure that followed. By 1993, the band accepted an invitation to perform on MTV Unplugged in New York. Gone were the walls of distortion and feedback. In their place, acoustic guitars, cello, and a setlist that sidestepped most of their biggest hits. Cobain's voice, stripped of effects, carried every line of pain and longing. The cover of Where Did You Sleep Last Night closed the show in near silence, Cobain's final note hanging in the air. The vulnerability on display reached millions, showing a side of the band rarely seen amid the noise. The industry was watching too. After Nevermind's explosion, major labels scrambled to sign any band with a flannel shirt and a fuzz pedal. Jonathan Poneman of Sub Pop described the frenzy. It was like a gold rush. Everyone wanted the next Nirvana. Radio and MTV playlists shifted overnight, and the entire business recalibrated around the sound and attitude Nirvana brought to the mainstream. The band's live presence and willingness to bear themselves, on stage and off, reshaped not just music but the culture surrounding it. On April 8, 1994, Kurt Cobain was found dead in a small greenhouse above his garage in Seattle. The electrician who discovered him had arrived to install a security system, expecting a routine job, not a tragedy that would echo around the world. Seattle police responded to the scene and began their investigation immediately. According to the King County Medical Examiner, Cobain had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The estimated date of death was April 5th, 3 days before his body was discovered. The toxicology report revealed a high concentration of heroin in Cobain's bloodstream, along with traces of Valium. Official documents noted that the level of heroin present was significant, enough to raise questions among some experts, but consistent with his known history of substance use. Alongside the body, police recovered a suicide note addressed to Cobain's family, friends, and fans. In it, he wrote about feeling numb, overwhelmed by the pressures of fame, and unable to find joy in music the way he once did. He ended the note with a plea for his wife and daughter to carry on without him, expressing love and regret in equal measure. The Seattle Police Department's file included photographs, ballistics analysis, and a full account of the scene. After reviewing the evidence, the medical examiner formally ruled the death a suicide. The official record, grounded in the coroner's findings and police investigation, stands as the most complete account of Kurt Cobain's final days. In the months after Kurt Cobain's death, questions circulated well beyond the official findings. Tom Grant, a private investigator once hired by Courtney Love, stepped forward with a series of doubts about the case. Grant pointed to the heroin concentration in Cobain's bloodstream, 1.52 milligrams per liter, arguing that such a dose would have rendered Cobain unconscious within seconds. He questioned whether it was physically possible for Kurt to operate a shotgun in that state. Grant also highlighted the lack of legible fingerprints on the weapon and raised concerns about the sequence of credit card use after the estimated time of death. He cited police photos and the arrangement of evidence, suggesting that some details did not add up. Seattle police, however, have repeatedly reviewed the case and maintained their original ruling. Official files, including the coroner's report and crime scene analysis, support the conclusion of suicide. No new forensic evidence has surfaced to contradict this. Amid the speculation, those closest to Cobain have chosen to remember the person behind the headlines. Chris Novoselic, speaking in 1994, said, "Kurt was a beautiful guy. He touched so many people with his writing. For better or worse, he changed everything." The debate over what happened in that greenhouse continues, but the impact of Cobain's life and art remains clear to those who knew him best. On April 5, 1994, Kurt Cobain died in Seattle, just at the age of 27, ending Nirvana's extraordinary run that began with their formation in 1987. Nevermind, released on September 24, 1991, profoundly changed the music industry, selling millions and making Nirvana a global phenomenon. The band's meteoric rise, captured in performances like Reading 1992 and MTV Unplugged in 1993, redefined rock for a new generation. Official records from Seattle police and the coroner ruled Cobain's death a suicide, citing toxicology results and a handwritten note. Yet, questions remain. Tom Grant's investigation and ongoing public debate highlight uncertainties that have never been fully resolved. What is indisputable is the impact. Nirvana's music continues to resonate, inspiring artists and listeners worldwide. The facts tell of a band whose legacy is anchored in raw honesty and cultural upheaval, and whose story, documented in recordings, interviews, and official reports, remains as vital today as when it first began.